everybody to SHARP training, November 2015. I'm Captain Standish. I'm one of the victim advocates for the regiment. I'm an OCS platoon trainer, for those of you who haven't met me or don't know who I am. And today we are going to be talking about SHARP. So, as all of us who have got through AVIC know, first thing you want to do is do a motivator, right? Get everybody engaged and excited. And so I went out and I was looking for videos and trying to find something that's going to get everybody like, all right, let's talk about SHARP. And you can go a couple directions with that. And one is you can do something like The Office, right? We've all seen those videos of Michael Scott trying to do sexual harassment training that backfires horribly. But I don't really want to make a joke out of it either, because I want everybody to leave here thinking about it really seriously and what we can do to make improvements. So then you can also go through and try to find something really touching and moving and a survivor story or something like that. But most of the videos that are out there that are survivor stories or that are done by civilians who are looking at the military sexual assault system, they're a little bit negative, right? And rightly so, because this is a very serious topic and it has a huge impact on people's lives. And I want everybody to come in today thinking about it's important for us to recognize where we're at. It's important to acknowledge everything that's happening. But what we really want to do is take all of that information and just figure out how we can make things better. So where are our opportunities for improvement? What are we able to do in the regiment, in the National Guard, at our next unit, in our communities, wherever it is, to make things a little bit better? So I've been a victim advocate for about a year. And I also, for those of you who know me, I'm a registered dietitian at the Minneapolis VA hospital as well. So dietitians can do a lot of different things. I work with outpatients. So I work with people on diabetes or heart disease or kidney disease or liver disease. But the vast majority of the patients I see I'm working with on weight loss. And one thing that happens to come up quite a bit is that a lot of my victims, or a lot of my patients that have morbid obesity that's attached to some mental health issues, many of them were victims of military sexual trauma. So that's something I want you to think about as we go through this, is we spend a lot of time talking about how does sexual assault affect our unit? How does sexual assault affect our mission readiness? How does it affect the Army as a whole? But I also want you to think a lot about how does it affect this individual soldier? Not just at that moment, not just while they're here, but once they leave, the relationships that they have afterwards. Many of the veterans that I see that were victims of military sexual trauma are divorced or have difficulty with relationships. Many of them have binge eating disorder because one of two things, they either eat for comfort, they eat to handle that depression and those feelings, because food can make us feel better sometimes, right? But some of them also feel like if I make myself not attractive to other people, then people will just leave me alone. And we don't want to send people out of the military with those feelings. We want to send people out of the military with increased confidence, with strong relationships, the ability to build strong relationships once they leave. And sexual assault can really prevent that for people as they move forward from their military career. So, in thinking about that, if you were sexually assaulted tomorrow, or the next day, or the next week, or at annual training, what would you do? And who would you tell? All of us have sat through SHARP training before. I know that for a fact. What would you do?
I would decide if I would want it restricted or unrestricted.
Okay.
And if I wanted it restricted, I would go to a chaplain.
Okay.
And if I wanted it unrestricted, I would get my leadership involved. I've been raped.
Okay. So you hit on a lot of important topics there. We have different options, right? And we're going to hit on those and talk about those. We'll talk about when it's appropriate to do that restricted and unrestricted, and who you can report to. So if you're a soldier, you touched on this a little bit, as a leader, if a soldier came to you and told you, what's the only reporting option they have at that point?
Unrestricted.
Unrestricted. Why?
Too many people know already knows about it.
The chain of command has already become involved. So we're going to talk a lot about if you are sexually assaulted, what path can you take? Who can you tell? What can you do? So jumping right into that, the types of reports, as we already brought up, thank you, are unrestricted and restricted. So we're going to go through each of these and show the difference between restricted and unrestricted. The first thing to note is that if it goes unrestricted, that means that an investigation will be launched. So if this report goes unrestricted, they're going to start looking into it. If you choose to go restricted, no investigation will be launched. If you choose unrestricted, you can get a military or civilian order of protection. What does that mean?
Restraining order?
A restraining order, basically, right? If it goes restricted, you cannot get a military protection order. Why not? Right. Then everybody would know. If you don't want to tell us who it was, we can't get an order against them. If you choose to go unrestricted, you can request an expedited transfer. What's an expedited transfer?
Go to a different unit right away?
You go to a different unit right away. Leadership can take you out of the position you're in and get you to a place where you feel safe if you choose. You do not have to leave your current unit. However, again, if you go restricted, you cannot order an expedited transfer. Again, because everybody would know, and your chain of command has to be involved at that point. If you go unrestricted, you can certainly receive medical attention. What if you go restricted?
Yes.
You can still get medical attention. If you go unrestricted, you can get a victim advocate. What if you go restricted?
Yes.
Absolutely. You can still have a victim advocate assigned to you, even if you file a restricted report. If you go unrestricted, you can have military and or civilian resources. What if you go restricted? We still have tons and tons and tons of resources available to you, both on the military side and on the civilian side.
You just have to go to certain ones on the civilian side, correct?
Correct.
Otherwise, they're mandated reporters.
Exactly. So once certain people and organizations on the civilian side get involved, they have to tell law enforcement. And if they have to tell law enforcement, well, you wouldn't have to file a military unrestricted report. A civilian investigation may still be launched and likely will be launched at that point. So that's certainly an important distinction to make. And if you are assaulted or a friend of yours is assaulted and you help bring them to a victim advocate or the SARC, they'll walk you through what's going to happen, which resources are available. But mental health is available, religious or spiritual resources are available. The medical help that we talked about, all of it is still available, even if you want to keep it restricted. An unrestricted report can never be changed to a restricted report. Why?
Cat's out the bag.
It's already out there. There's nothing to restrict. Chain of command is already aware of it. The process has already been started. However, if you choose to go restricted with a report, that option never goes away for you to change it to an unrestricted report. If you choose 6 months later, 9 months later, that, you know what, I do want to make this an unrestricted report and start an investigation, you can still do that.
Is there a statute of limitations on that, Matt?
There is a statute of limitations on it. I can't remember off the top of my head specifically what it is for the military, but I can get back to you on that. And it's different for civilian resources depending on where it happened and what the resource is. And part of that is because if you file a restricted report and we get you medical attention and you get the SAFE kit, which, does anybody know what the SAFE kit is? It's, a lot of us know it as a rape kit, or that's what you would hear it as. If you get that done, It is generally done at a civilian hospital by a certified nurse, and they will store that kit at their facility for a certain amount of time. Now, the goal is for it to be stored, I think, 5 years in Minnesota. However, if they have too many things coming in, sometimes they get rid of them earlier. So know that if you do get that safe kit done, they will hold on to it for a while, and that evidence is really, really important. So you want to think about, if you want to make it unrestricted, that some of those things will go away after a period of time. Yes.
Some feedback on that third one down and restricted, I guess. I'm trying to figure out why that makes sense. And maybe they taught that to you during the training, but so if a soldier gets sexually assaulted, the commander doesn't know about it, so potentially that soldier that got assaulted plus the perpetrator could be drilling together in the same unit.
You could still request a transfer, and you would have to request that really through your victim advocate and try to find other ways around it, but you can't really get that expedited transfer, that process.
Okay, so they can still
Without-
immediately request transfer, just, you
So
can't just immediately.
they can request it, but the commander's gonna ask why.
Right.
Why do they want the transfer?
You can't give them a reason why.
And unless you wanna go unrestricted.
Okay.
And then at that point, if you're asking for an expedited transfer,
Because most likely the captain, the CO will just say, why do you wanna be in there? If they no, there's no reason why you need to be expedited transfer to another unit, unless they know the reason why.
Okay.
and exceptions to restricted reporting apply, and we'll talk through some of what that is. So how to report. If you file an unrestricted report, who can you report it to?
Everybody?
Victim advocate, chain of command, right? Chaplain, SARC, medical personnel, law enforcement, civilian or military, and JAG. What if you want to go restricted?
Victim advocate.
Victim advocate,
Chaplain.
chaplain,
Jack?
SARC, not JAG, but
A doctor?
so not through your chain of command, but through the SARC, the victim advocate, the chaplain, and the special victim counsel. Why do those two at the bottom have stars next to them?
Because they bring it forward if they feel like a chaplain is authorized to bring stuff forward if he hears anything that's threatening or dangerous to people.
So those two at the bottom cannot receive reports. So you can take a restricted report to them, but it's still gonna have to go through a victim advocate or through the SARC. So they cannot receive reports. However, the Special Victim Counsel will talk a little bit more about what that is in more detail, but you do have confidentiality with them just like you would with any attorney. Just like it says here, chaplains and the SVC can't take reports, but reporting to them does not take away that restricted option.
Can you back up just a second?
Oh, I sure can.
If I have a soldier that comes to me and I'm in their chain of command, you're saying that, and they tell me that they've had a sexual assault, it shouldn't go up or down the chain of command is what you're saying in that first statement, correct?
If they come to anybody in their leadership, anybody in their chain of command, it's an unrestricted report. So we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail on the slides down, but I'll touch on it here. So, say I was sexually assaulted. I could not go to Major Drutch as my commander and say, I've been sexually assaulted and I would like to file a restricted report. But I could go to Captain Bowler as Amber to Ryan and say, I've been sexually assaulted and I need your help. So you can go to a peer, a friend, but you want to think of it as civilian to civilian, not through your chain of command. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying, and that's where I have some issues with, you're going to have soldiers that have trust that you've built out. Me particularly, have built trust in me, that when they come to me, that I'm going to take that information and guide them in the right direction. But you're telling me it's immediately become an unrestricted report because they don't know who else to go to, or, are you understanding what I'm
Because
trying to say?
they
Right.
have to investigate. They have to issue,
Commanders
they have
have
to
to-
initiate
right.
an investigation to go through your chain of command. You can tell your battle buddy, as long as they don't go and tell another buddy.
Anybody else. So, exactly, if they tell somebody else, now it's an unrestricted report. So you wanna go to somebody that you trust, that's gonna keep this secret for you. Because if it gets to your chain of command, the investigation has to be started.
Are you talking just like commander-based chain of command, or my squad leader, my team leader, anything?
Anybody in your chain of command. Anybody in your chain of command is going to have to bring that forward. And that's why soldier education is so important on this topic. Because if they want that restricted option, they can absolutely go to a friend. They can go to somebody who is not in their chain of command, as long as it's considered civilian to civilian and not to military.
So what if I was to come to Major Dretch? I'm not, he's not in
It's
my
not your
chain.
direct chain of command, so.
So then,
If you trusted him. Not that you shouldn't trust him.
no, I,
I trust him. That's not what I meant.
My phone number?
And we'll talk about this. We'll continue to talk about this as we go through the slides. So bring up questions and thoughts as they come up.
so I can't call Molly.
So there's been a couple of updates, and you might be aware of these, but for unrestricted reports, within 20 days of reporting, local law enforcement will be notified. So the victim does have the option of notifying them on their own or taking the victim advocate to do so. Otherwise, JAG will notify local law enforcement. For restricted reports, you can now report to the Special Victims Council, and we're going to talk about what they are again in a little bit more detail. But it's something that Minnesota was kind of they kind of led the way in this area. We had one of the first Special Victims Councils. We'll talk about who that is too. Like it says here, you can also report to a friend, a family member, as long as they're not in your chain of command. And as somebody that you 100% trust to maintain that confidentiality. So a Special Victims Council is a specially trained JAG officer, and their main duty is assisting sexual assault victims. So they know all of the regulations, everything that goes into it, and they can advise the victim on what their options are. You can talk to them about a sexual assault and retain your restricted reporting option because you have attorney-client privileges with them. They do not report to the Adjutant General. They work for NGV. So they can assist with navigating both the civilian and military legal processes. And this is the number for Captain Williams, who is the current Special Victims Counsel. Anybody have any questions on that? It's kind of a newer thing that not everybody's familiar with. All right. So just to give you a little bit of data on where we're at with SHARP. So for TY15, there were 24 cases of sexual assault. Now if you average that out, that's about 1 every 15 days. And obviously, it doesn't happen like clockwork like that, and we'll see when most of them occurred. 92% were male on female, 4% were female on female, and this was the first case of female on female that we've had in Minnesota, and 4% were female on male. So what's typically the ranks and ages that are most susceptible to sexual assault? 18 to 24.
E1 to E5-ish.
So you can see 54% are rape. Others fall into the categories of attempted sexual assault or indecent sexual assault. 82% were E1 to E5. So that's the vast majority of sexual assaults happen in junior enlisted and junior NCOs. 17% were E6 to E9. So last year, all of our sexual assaults were within the enlisted ranks. 67% were 18 to 24. And then 11% in the next 3 age categories, as you can see there. So it's certainly the younger soldiers that are experiencing this the most. 58% were M-Day on duty. 26% were M-Day off duty. So over 80% of the sexual assaults that happen are happening on M-Day status. 11% were AGR and 5% were technician. For offenders, 40% were M-Day on duty, 30% were civilians, and then 5% each is AGR, tech, and Title 10. 15% were unknown. And as we know, alcohol plays a huge role in sexual assault. 79% of the cases involved alcohol. And in 63% of those, both the victim and the offender had been drinking. So there's a few other trends, and I'll pull up this PDF. We'll just look at a couple of things on there. But this is the number of reports DOD-wide. And we've talked about it last year and the year before on why we see that sharp increase, right? It's an increase in the number of reports, but as you'll see when I pull up this PDF, it's a decrease in the number of actual sexual assaults. So we'll talk a little bit about why that might be. So we're not going to go through this whole PDF because it's 40 pages and that we don't have time for that. But it's really interesting if you ever want to pull it up. It talks a lot about the different cases. It'll show you unrestricted versus restricted reports. So you can see here, for total DOD reports, the vast majority of them are unrestricted. 4,500 out of about 6,000 are unrestricted reports, which means that they're able to do something about it legally, or at least launch an investigation. This one shows a little bit about victim-driven versus case-driven. So even if you file an unrestricted report, it's up to you how much you want to be involved in that investigation. So if you file that unrestricted report, the investigation starts and you choose not to be interviewed, you choose not to participate in that, that's your choice, that's your option. The investigation will still go on. But you can see here that in a lot of cases, the victim does choose to be involved. This one is an interesting one because it shows there were an estimated 26,000 incidents of sexual assault in FY12 and 19,000 in FY14. So at least it's a trend downward, although it looks like it's back to where we were in 2010. But you can see that there's hopefully a little bit of an improvement and a trend downward in where we're going. And you can pull this whole thing and look at it and see where it is. You can see that all four branches are pretty comparable as well. So there's one more, if I can find it in here, this one right here. Now we're going to talk about reprisal a little bit, but I think this is really interesting. If you look at that lowest line there, subjects with command action declined. So unfounded by command or legal review of evidence. You can see that it's only 2%. So I think that's really important to note that if you do bring forward an unrestricted report, that in most cases, they're able to do something. Now granted, we can't promise that it's going to be the outcome that you're looking for, right? There's more statistics in here to show that there are offenders who are found guilty who are still given an honorable discharge. So it's not a perfect world, right? And the result's not always going to be exactly what we want, but you can see that in almost every case, not all, but most, that they were able to do something. We talk a lot about taking that power away from the commander, right? We can see here that the command really only had an influence in 2% of saying that there's no founded claim. So, why do we see those differences? What's changed? What's changed in the last 2 to 5 years, really, that's made that increase of reports go up, but incidents go down? There's a few things.
Commander's open door policy or speak
okay to talk about sexual assault. We're creating more of a culture where it's okay to have these conversations and to come forward, and creating more of an environment of tolerance around helping the victim rather than blaming the victim. And that's a big thing that's changed with our training, is if you look at training 5 or 10 years ago, a lot of that said, how do we avoid sexual assault? We walk in battle buddy teams, we don't dress provocatively, we don't drink, always bring a flashlight so that you have illumination. So we were talking about what can a person do to not be a victim? Here's how you can protect yourself and not be a victim. Versus now our training has shifted to more awareness, and what can you do to not be an offender and to keep your friends from being offenders? And how do we create this environment of intolerance for sexual offenders? So we've changed the way that we educate on SHARP. We've changed the method of training, having a more open culture. There has been a change in processes and regulations. So if you look through the specific regulations and how we charge somebody and what the definitions are, those have changed a little bit in the past few years too. And then the SBC, as I said, Minnesota was one of the first states to have a Special Victims Council, which is a really great opportunity for us to have this added resource for our soldiers to go to. And then, does anybody know what the Safe Harbor Act is? Has anybody heard of that? It's a civilian act. So we'll talk about it a little bit, but basically, on the civilian side, Minnesota's been doing the same thing. So we're going to touch on sex trafficking a little bit. And the way that Minnesota used to prosecute sex trafficking cases was that the young girls who were put into sex trafficking were treated as prostitutes. So they were brought in, and they were charged with offenses, and they were put into juvenile court system. Versus now, in Minnesota, when a child is found in a sex trafficking ring or is being prostituted by somebody, now we prosecute that person. We prosecute their pimp. We don't prosecute the girl. We give them help, mental health assistance, and all sorts of different things through the Safe Harbor Act. There's a lot of information about it online if you're interested in learning a little more about it. So we all hear this thing about consent, right? What is consent? So words or overt acts indicating a freely given agreement to sexual conduct at issue by a competent person. What's a competent person? Sober. What else? Mentally capable. Of age, right? So it's any expression of lack of consent through words or conduct means there is no consent. Silence is not consent. Lack of verbal or physical resistance or submission resulting from the accused use of force, threat of force, or placing another person in fear does not constitute consent. So if you have made them so scared that they feel like they have to have sex with you, because if they don't, you are going to insert thing here, tell everybody about something, share pictures, do whatever you're going to do. And they say, okay, I'll have sex with you because I don't want you to tell my parents about this, or I don't want you to put that picture on Facebook. Even though there was technically a yes in there, that is not consent. That is coercion. Occurrence or previous dating relationship, or the manner of dress, is not consent. A dress is not a yes. It doesn't matter what the victim is wearing. They are not asking to be raped. It doesn't matter what relationship you've had with them in the past. It does not mean they want to have sex with you now. So previous consent does not equal current consent. If they are sleeping or incapacitated, they cannot consent. So, we're going to watch a video.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they go, oh my God.